Hi, this is John Potter and welcome to session 8 of Leadership in Action. And in this session we're going to have a look at the very important topic of how leaders can unlock human potential.
In session 8 we're going to see how leaders can unlock human potential. This is very much a contemporary issue, and it's one that builds on the work of Peter Senge at MIT. And in 1990, as we've already mentioned, Senge said the leader's new work is about developing capability by unlocking the potential of the people in the organization. In slide 2, we're going to focus on the importance of understanding perceptions and beliefs, particularly on the part of the leader. So we've already suggested that the leader's role seemed to shift around about 1990 from the idea that the leaders worked basically on command and control basis to one of developing the capability of the organization and unlocking the potential of its people. Well, this was reflected by Peter Senge at MIT at Cambridge, Massachusetts in the USA, and over the years psychologists have suggested that most people work on just a fraction of their potential, perhaps in the order of 5% of their abilities. And recent studies at Stanford Research Institute in the USA suggest this might be as low as 0.05% in some cases. Now, we have no quantitative way of measuring this, but it is an interesting, almost philosophical thought that very few of us tap into the true genius that everyone probably has about them, certainly in their unconscious mind. And the growth of the subject known as positive psychology tends to suggest that people's success is driven more by their perceptions of themselves and their beliefs than any other factors. Jordan, a consultant psychologist, has proposed 5 principles of success in his approach to positive psychology: taking responsibility, setting goals, being positive, persevering intelligently, and connecting with others. And it's interesting that these issues are invariably addressed both overtly and covertly by effective leaders in terms of their development of their people. And it could well be that what we're now looking at, success in human terms, is perhaps everybody becoming a leader in terms of certain abilities. So we've said that the job of the leader should involve developing the confidence of his or her people and encouraging positive beliefs. So before you move on to the next slide, give some thought to the following study questions. What positive beliefs do you have about yourself as a leader? What percentage of your capabilities do you feel you tap into on a regular basis? How well do you shape up to Jordan's 5 characteristics of positive psychology of taking responsibility, setting goals, being positive, persevering intelligently, and connecting with others? Just give some thought to those questions before moving on to the next slide. In slide 3, we're going to have a look at what makes people tick, so that we can understand the importance of beliefs and where they fit in to an understanding of the human being. Now, we've already encountered the circles model of the human being, and we will now develop this model to give some insight on motivation. In this model, the core of the individual is their self-concept, which is made up of their identity, their beliefs, and their values. This is a key area for the leader to address if she or he wants to unlock the potential of their people. The 5 areas mentioned in the previous slide need to be encouraged until they're part of the individual's perception of their identity. They see themselves as taking responsibility, they see themselves as goal setters, they see themselves as being positive, persevering, and connecting effectively with others. This concept level, what we call the self-concept level of the person, is in fact their personal mental engine, their source of energy, their qi in terms of Chinese philosophy. For example, the Tao Te Ching will talk very much about qi. The self-concept is fueled by the person's sense of higher purpose, and this is where the issues of mission, vision and values once again is clearly important. So before moving on to the next slide, just give some thought to these study questions. Have you considered what is really important to you as a leader, to your organisation, and what is important to the people with whom you work? Can you identify any negative beliefs which may be holding you back in terms of leadership performance? How often do you engage your chi, your personal energy? Just give some thought to those before moving on to the next slide. Now in slide 4 we're going to consider some very important issues in terms of unlocking human potential, the issues of competence, capability and contribution. Now when a leader wants to embark on unlocking the potential of one of her or his people, there are a number of things that need to be taken into consideration. Firstly, what is the person's current capability level? What is the person's set of strengths? What are their areas for development? We try to avoid the use of the word weaknesses in that it can produce a negative impact on the individual's self-esteem on the basis that you get what you think about. And of course that sort of effect can reduce their motivation to develop themselves. We prefer instead to talk about areas of development. And it's then important to look at the competencies required for the person to do their job effectively and the competence that will be required for the next level up in the organisation, assuming they are being groomed for promotion. Coaching plays an important role in the process of developing individuals, and it is a highly effective way of developing capability using real-life work situations. Finally, it's useful for the leader to take time out to reflect on what the ideal level of contribution that an individual can make to the organisation, so creating a personal vision for that person's capability in the future. However, although it's important to pay attention to the detail issues of competence, capability and contribution level, it is important to remember that it is attitude as well as skills and knowledge which is a key contributor to success or otherwise. Encouraging positive beliefs, particularly in the importance of developing oneself, is a key part of developing capability of individuals and of the organisation. So before moving on to the next slide, just give some thought to the following study questions. In an ideal world, can you identify what each of your individual people should contribute to the organisation? Secondly, have you created a personal capability vision for each of your people? Let's give some thought to that before moving on. In slide 5, we move into the idea of the nature of empowerment for people at work. And the idea of empowerment has been very topical since the 1990s. The idea, essentially, is that the leader can leverage her or his ability by empowering the people that they lead to make appropriate decisions and work on their own initiative in an almost autonomous way rather than being bossed around and controlled all the time. However, empowerment without a few important issues being in place can be non-productive, and in some cases demotivating, as the individual may feel they're being dumped upon. What is important is that the individual being empowered is aligned to the goals and work of the organisation. Hence the importance, once again, of the organisation's mission, vision and values being clearly transmitted throughout the organisation. Secondly, the individual must be competent as regards the work with which they are being empowered. Thirdly, and just as important as the other two issues, is that the person must accept the idea of being empowered. They need to have a flexible attitude and one which represents a positive perspective of growing in their current job in preparation for the next step in their career. In short, they must be willing to be empowered. So just give some thought to the following study questions. Do you feel empowered as a leader? If not, which of the three issues of alignment, competence and attitude need to be addressed? Select one of the people who report to you and assess their levels of alignment, competence and attitude. What action should you take to develop the empowerment of that person? Let's give that some thought before moving on to the next slide. We've touched on the idea of motivation already, and in conventional motivation theory there are many theories of human motivation. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's Hertzberg's hygiene and motivator factors, there's McGregor's XY theory, and so on and so forth. There are many theories. Now, amongst the most notable, of course, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which suggests that individuals have a set of needs based on air, food, water and survival at the lowest level. Once those needs are met, then the individual focuses on achieving a sense of safety and security, and then higher up the hierarchy, then belonging, then self-esteem, and then finally this state of self-actualization or achieving their potential when the lower order needs are satisfied. It has been a very useful model and it has served us well, but it was invented in the 1950s and maybe we've moved on a little bit since then. Another commonly discussed model is that of Frederick Hertzberg, who suggested that the issues that when satisfied motivate people are not the same as those issues when not satisfied. The hygiene factors tend to demotivate people. Now, the motivators tend to be a sense of achievement, recognition, work itself, responsibility, advancement and growth. The hygiene factors, which when not satisfied can lead to dissatisfaction, include company policy, supervision, relationships with the boss, work conditions, salary, and relationship with peers and other people, if you like. So McGregor's work focused on a suggestion that there was a spectrum of leader and manager attitudes to their followers. At one end of the spectrum, Theory X managers and leaders tend to believe that their people are a cost, are lazy, will try and get away with the minimal contribution, whereas at the other end, Theory Y managers and leaders believe their people want to be successful, and all they need is training, encouragement, and the opportunity to enable them to grow. The interesting issue here is that both ends of the spectrum seem to produce people who reflect the manager or leader's expectations. In reality, most managers and leaders fall somewhere in the middle of the two end states, and it's important to recognize that expectations do play an important part in leading and managing others, particularly in terms of the beliefs which are encouraged. So the study questions for this slide are as follows. Can you identify the commonalities between Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Hertzberg's motivators and hygiene theories? Can you identify 3 leaders and managers to whom you've been exposed and place them on the XY expectation spectrum? Just give those questions some thought on slide 6 before you move on to the next slide. In this slide, slide 7, we bring motivation up to date with what I call a composite approach. And this is a practical model for motivating others that I put together in 2007. Both Maslow and Hertzberg created their motivation theories in the middle of the 20th century, followed by McGregor with his work on the human side of enterprise in the 1960s. The world has changed considerably since those times, and it could be argued that people do not change that much in basic terms, however their environment has. I produced this composite model of motivation which incorporates several approaches to motivation, including the work of Maslow and Hertzberg. Firstly, there are 2 clusters of motivational factors which we've identified. The first cluster, the basic factors, include the individual feeling significant, having a sense of certainty about the future, having variety in their work and feeling connected to the organization. If any or all of those factors are not satisfied, then there's a good chance that the individual will become demotivated. However, no matter how much resource and efforts put into those 4 factors, they do not seem to motivate people only to stop them being demotivated if they are not satisfied. What seems to motivate people is when they feel they are growing in personal terms in their current position, and that they have a feeling of making a valued contribution to something worthwhile. These two clusters of factors form the essence of motivational leadership and must be taken seriously. So before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the study questions. Considering your own work position, how well do you feel the basic factors of feeling significant, having a sense of certainty about the future, having variety in your work, and feeling connected to the rest of the organisation are satisfied as far as you're concerned? How well are the motivating factors of growing in personal terms in your current position and developing a feeling of making a valued contribution to something worthwhile satisfied? Considering the people that you lead, what answers do you think they would give as to the extent to which they feel the basic and motivating factors are satisfied? Reflect on those questions before moving on to the next slide. In slide 8 we move on to a really exciting leadership concept, the idea of developing peak performers. Now, one aim of the leader should be to develop peak performers where possible in order to develop the capability of the organisation. Human beings need a certain amount of pressure to create effective performance levels, but if that pressure is too great, they can become stressed and their performance can suffer. Now, this concept was originally put forward by WOeRK and Dodson in the early 20th century with their findings on performance and level of arousal caused by pressure and stress. The concept has been developed into peak performance psychology by a number of authors, including Kriegel and Kriegel in their book The C-Zone. The C-zone is the peak performance zone which lies between burnout with too much pressure and rust out with too little pressure. And one aim of the leader should be to develop peak performers wherever possible. Human beings need a certain amount of pressure to create effective performance levels, but if that pressure is too great, they can become stressed and their performance can suffer. The Kriegels name the zones either side of the peak performance, or the C-zone as we call it, as the panic zone with too much pressure and the drone zone with too little pressure. In order to spend more time in the C-zone, it is argued that individuals should engage in goal setting to create commitment, training and development to gain confidence, and then in developing time management and personal organisation skills to develop control and thus self-esteem. The leader can play a vital role in developing these three aspects of commitment, confidence and control. Another writer on peak performers is Charles Garfield, who identified that peak performers have a sense of mission, that they deliver results in real time, they display self-mastery in terms of competence, were good at team building and team playing, good at applying feedback to their work when necessary, and they were effective change leaders and managers. Leaders need to pay attention to these issues for both themselves and the people that they lead. Now, the study questions to go with this peak performance slide are these. What proportion of your time do you spend in the C-zone compared to the panic and rust-out zones? What can you do to develop your abilities in terms of these three areas of commitment, of confidence and control? And what can you do as a leader to develop these areas in your people? Just give some thought to those before moving on to the next slide. In slide 9, which is the final slide for session 8, we're going to have a few words about the bibliography. Again, Richard Daft's book called Leadership is a very comprehensive look at performance and how people respond. And The Principles of Success by Patrick Jordan. It's not available in the bookshops, but it's available from his website www.patrickwjordan.net, published in 2010, a very useful little pocketbook on the whole issue of positive psychology. The C-Zone by Kriegel and Kriegel, published some time ago, 1987, by Cedar Books, is a very, very useful little personal guide. As we've already suggested, perhaps human beings don't change that much, and some of these books that have occurred some 20-30 years ago still have a lot to offer. And that C-Zone book particularly is very good at getting a fix on where you are personally. And then Charles Garfield's Peak Performance book, published by Avon in 1986, is also a good book. He talks particularly about the mission orientation of NASA and when we've had these fantastic teams working so effectively. And the characteristics he describes of peak performance very much are relevant to this modern world. So that's the end of session 8. I look forward to speaking with you in session 9. Thank you.